Hello again, friends. During our week, there won't be another example of 2 talks in one morning, but we're just getting started. So I thought establishing the view is a useful thing for us, because as experienced meditators, we sort of get well, at least I can speak for myself, we develop sort of a habitual way of being on the Ganden. And when we have an opportunity to do more intensive practice, it's a great time to re-engage, review what our understanding is of what we're doing. In popular culture, mindfulness is often seen as a sort of a power that you build up. It's like being able to run a marathon or lift weights or remember a lot of things. And you can validly look at it that way. But in our tradition, we have a little different understanding that goes along with the view of basic goodness. When we say mindfulness, what do we mean by mind? What is it that is being full of itself? What is it that is being tamed and trained? Well, in our tradition, again, mind is sel, shing, rigpa, clear and knowing. The mind is transparent, you might say. It's not a thing. And it can penetrate or permeate or pervade any of its objects of knowing. In this, it's a little like the sun. That would be its the principal metaphor is the sun illuminates everything. So if the mind is clear in knowing, how does it get confused? It takes the form of what it projects when it becomes a consciousness. It becomes absorbed in all sorts of things that are divided really into 3, you could say. First of all, a sense of this and that, which is a little hard for us to see since it's such a basic assumption we have about how we know things. But we assume that my mind is in here in my head somewhere, and it's like a little heavy machinery operator who's operating this body and looking through the various sense perceptions. And then the mind is all kinds of names and concepts. So when I take this and I do this, the first experience is hua, that's a technical term, hua, and the second experience is gong, Dan hit the gong. That means it's time to, right? There's a whole train of concepts and names that are attached to our immediate experience. They're divided into the gong is out there and I'm in here hearing it and it has this name and there's a little story behind it and it's going to lead to something else. And we play out those stories both in our relationship to the more or less present moment and also by running movies in our head. So mind is absorbed in its concepts. And it takes immediate experience and it extracts the building blocks of those concepts. And then lastly, mind is, you might say, jazzed up in super thoughts called emotions of pure juiced upness, jealousy, right? It's just like, and that's just like pouring if our concepts are the coals, then our emotions are like pouring gasoline on them. So those layers of absorbed mind, remember we started with mind being clear and knowing, and now it's frozen, it's absorbed into objects of knowing. And those objects of knowing are defined by names, concepts, and they get a lot of identity in a passion play of our life through emotion. And that kind of mind that's absorbed is quite inflexible. So if you try to talk to someone who's angry, say, here, let me reason with you, right? Their mind is frozen in feeling. Or if you go outside and for some reason your heart is opening, so the snow's so beautiful, and your friend says, yeah, it's going to be a pain in the ass digging the car out. Right? There's a story, it's frozen, it's not able to actually feel, it's just drawing a conclusion and freezing up, like water stopping flowing. And that inflexibility means that mind and body decouple, that we're no longer really in our body. And our mind is not accurately reflecting present experience. That we're sort of in a bubble. We're in what's that? Iron Man. Remember Iron Man? Remember the Iron Man suit? It's really cool, actually. He pushes, what was the name? Robert Downey, right? He pushes a button and it goes clank, 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 and all of a sudden you're sort of clomping around your life. And you can't actually feel the snow as it hits your body. So it becomes heavy and unresponsive and very needy because it's so isolated. There's this tremendous longing to connect and tremendous frustration about the isolation of me and other. So that leads to a lot of suffering. Basically, it's ignoring the fluidity of the world, ignoring impermanence, and it's not able to experience the transparency of the knower. We think there's a solid knower happening. That's why we sit. We say, I want to get to the bottom of this problem, and fixing exterior situations doesn't seem to do it. I still have all this anxiety. If you look at how we live, we have unbelievable amount of comfort. Most of us don't have any concerns about having food or warmth or beauty. And yet we feel anxiety all the time. We feel dissatisfied. So the motivation for practice then is that I'd like to get to the core of this issue rather than running around in circles trying to arrange things so I feel less panicky about it. I feel less panicky about myself. The point I'm making, though, is that we're not building up a state of peace. We're in an unbuilding, undoing, letting go process, a simplifying process that exposes that the mind is inherently in a state of peace when it's let alone, so to speak. It's inherently clear and knowing. And we can, through the discipline of simplicity, through shamatha, it can learn to rest in its own nature without leaving, without getting absorbed and carried away. And that's a training process, because we have a lot of habitual and emotional drivers that re-engage us in absorption. So training or taming the mind is allowing it to be fully embodied mind in the present moment, stable, vivid, and strong. Stable, not jumping from thing to thing. Vivid, that the present moment is not cloudy, but penetrating and pervasive. And strong, not easily distracted from its own resting. And the technique of training we use is called placement, or familiarizing ourselves. We're placing the mind on the breath and returning to it again and again is the essence of mindfulness or shamatha. I'm going to say that again. Placing the mind on the breath and returning to it again and again is the essence of shamatha. That we have a very simple, intimate, moving, ethereal object that the mind becomes absorbed in, and it's so simple and so intimate and so present that the mind starts to exhibit its own present knowing. We call it sheshin. So there's three parts to that placement that we're doing again and again and again in shamatha. The first is developing familiarity with the breath. We think we know what the breath is, but actually it's a pretty haphazard knowing. Knowing the breath in the present moment is an intimate experience and an enjoyable experience, a soothing experience. So we become really familiar with the breath. That's the first part of placement. And the second part of placement is we're constantly remembering. In other words, the breath is constantly present. Even when our mind is being pulled this way and that way, the breath is constantly there. We're constantly haunted in a positive way. That we're in a state of not forgetting, you could say. That's being present and knowing the texture of the present moment, those two things. So familiarity, remembering or not forgetting, and then lastly, non-distraction is that clear knowing mind shines through whatever comes up. It doesn't get captured and drug away. And the way we do that is not by trying hard. Tremendous sense of gentleness and precision is needed, of not too tight and not too loose. If you try and wrestle your mind into the present moment, your mind will make a fool of you because it's your mind who's wrestling. In other words, wrestling begets more wrestling. So a gentle, repetitive application of the technique allows us to settle into our own goodness. And our thoughts keep arising, but they become more and more transparent, less and less distracting, less and less absorbing. So a tamed mind stays present, and it exhibits three qualities which we're going to look into more as the week goes on: stability, clarity, and strength. So to review, mind in its nature is clear and knowing. Confused mind gets absorbed in duality, thinking and concepts and emotionality. Peaceful abiding, or shamatha, is a way of training and taming the mind so it recognizes its own nature and gradually develops familiarity, not forgetting, and non-distraction in regard to its object, which is the breath. And so tamed mind stays present. Present means stable, clear, and strong. Thank you for your kind attention. If there are any comments or questions, they would be welcome, including from our esteemed electronic beings in places near and far. Please be generous by when you ask a question that benefits everybody.
It seems like we always want to be checking that. We don't trust that when we practice. We want some gauge to tell us if actually our mind is clear and present. And so that's where we get screwed up often, is wanting to verify the statements that you made. Because we don't really have confidence that that's our mind. It's nice to hear it. Thank you very much. Very pleasant.
Yeah, the checking process is actually valid in the beginning. In other words, you're in the beginning stages of placement, in the first 4 stages of the 9 stages. Not forgetting is forgetting that what you're doing is the problem, and the challenge. So there's a quality of checking, like, oh, I was gone. What am I supposed to be doing? And you check. And then when you have quite a bit of stability, something called mindfulness of mind happens, and there's a subtle and sanctioned, pretty non-conceptual sense of checking, which is, it's happening, I'm present, you're recognizing that you're present. So there is this little checking loop that's happening that's not very conceptual at all. So I think you're quite right that how much checking happens is completely based on how much confidence we have. And in the beginning, we don't have much confidence, so we're pretty manual about it. We're encouraging ourselves to do the technique, and we're saying, oh, I got lost, label it thinking, now what am I supposed to do? Oh, identify with the breath. It's a big check. And later you're able to be present, and there's this sense of I'm present. That's related to Sheshin, that you're aware of the sense that you're aware. So, checking based on distrust of ourselves doesn't help too much. Checking based on discovering our own natural qualities is just part of how we do it. Thank you. Nathan, did you have a question?
Yes. Along these lines, on a very practical level, when we are following the breath as our object of meditation and a thought comes in, I was struck by how you describe that when we're resting the mind, those thoughts become more translucent.
Yes.
So it's along these lines of like checking in on, does it count to be with the breath but have a thought? Is that being distracted? Or are we allowing that thought to be there while we're with the breath as much as possible?
Yeah. So sometimes we have our idea of commitment to placing the mind in the breath, which is very important because it's that commitment that I want to be present. I want to actually do this. That's the basis of the third foundation of mindfulness, that you can't have spontaneous discipline without that commitment. But it wants in our culture to become moralistic. Am I being bad? Am I being naughty? That quality of naughtiness. And there's a sense of, well, if I was a good meditator, I wouldn't have all these thoughts. That was in the beginning. Like, why am I having, I've been meditating for 20 years and still I'm having this avalanche of thoughts this morning. Think, oh, I must be a bad person or a bad meditator. Actually, if you look at the text, that means you're a good meditator. Because when you start working with placement, what the text says, it's like the first thing you experience is a waterfall of thoughts. That's because you're doing it right. Why? Because you're experiencing the contrast of peaceful abiding and absorption. And also, those thoughts are all over the place. They're just completely out of hand. So they're not functioning well as a cocoon. It's like a dysfunctional cocoon. So there's no need to feel bad about that, but the sense is constant application. And then once you get to more or less the sixth level of the 9 stages, they talk about mind seems very, very settled, but if you get close to it, you can see that the constant subconscious thoughts are happening under the surface. And so the question is, how do you apply effort? And an extremely unhelpful way of applying effort is to criticize yourself. There's a sense of, for me, a sense of sadness, gentleness, and precision. That you actually allow yourself, when you presently feel thought, you're not following it by being pulled by the nose, but you feel it. It ceases to act as absorption because thoughts arise, dwell, and fall away, and when you're fully present. So it's that constant rediscovery of the present moment is full of energy and little thoughts. Thoughts are natural to the mind. They're not an insult to the meditation. Then you're a fish swimming in the sea, as opposed to like, how do I get out of this water? Right? It's a bright world.
Thank you.
Jeanine Greenleaf would like to ask, or would like you to say something about the role of curiosity in this process of checking, like wondering how we got here.
Yeah, it's what I call, it's the Sanskrit is WTF. That there's definitely a sense of when you practice and you start to become bored, there's a quality of like, what's going on here? How does this thing actually work? Where does this stuff come from? How does this big interlocking me in my world and is sort of coexisting in this bright present moment. How does all that work? That curiosity is the beginning of Vipassana, which is another topic altogether. In shamatha, we sort of label it thinking. You know, there's a basic bright-eyed curiosity about the breath in particular, that you want to know a lot about the breath. But it's also awakening a bigger curiosity about how this world works. And that's one of the forms of Vipassana, that you are no longer trying to fix something or get somewhere, you're just deeply, deeply curious. At the end of the week, we'll probably look a little bit at Vipassana, the 4 kinds of Vipassana, and how that works. Janine, is that addressing your question? Was I barking up the right tree there? Okay, I got a thumbs up. I like that. Yeah. All right. Again, thank you for your attention, and we'll have more chance for discussion, and everyone will have chance for meditation instruction to look into your practice. So again, we're not looking to achieve an ideal state that is constructed out of discipline, where we'll somehow transcend the world or get to a happy place. We're deconstructing the momentum of our panic about existence so our natural, clear and knowing wakefulness can shine through. All right. I have to look at my notes. What do we do now? Are people fine to sit for a while? Okay, let's try it out and see what happens. On your mark.